And welcome to Forum 360. I'm your host, Bill Steven Saus. We are a program that discusses topics with a global outlook and a local view. We are viewed on PBS Western Reserve, the Fusion Channels 4549. We are on Hudson Community TV, our host studio, and we're heard on Rubber City radio stations, WONE FM and WAKR AM and FM. And today we have a global topic, a global outlook with a local view. We are going to be talking about what's always seems to be a tragic problem here in this country and around the world globally, and that is active shooters that are threatening local communities, local businesses, local shopping centers, churches, synagogues, and schools. And today we are fortunate to have here in the Western Reserve area a police department and representatives from a police department that are actively trying to promote training to help people respond and what to do if there is an active shooter. Today we are fortunate to have law enforcement officers from Medina Police Department, Officer Daryn Winebrenner. Daryn, hello.
Hello.
And Officer Kelly Moran. Good to have you today. And we want to thank Chief Ed Kinney, of the Chief of Medina Police Department, and Mayor Dennis Hanwell for allowing our topic to be discussed here with our representatives from their police department. We have this global outlook of shootings that cause distress. We've had in the news in the last year or so, we've seen many of these responding to crisis situations, really. And we have with us today officers that are now training the communities where they work, and they are basically, I think, one of the first community policing organizations that are dealing with active shooter training. Daryn, would tell us a little bit about how you and Kelly got involved in this type of training.
Well, I've been a police officer with Medina for 26 years now. I have a background in training and tactics. Having spent 20 years on the SWAT team, I do a lot of the in-service training for our department, as well as in the community, different subjects, personal safety, women's self-defense. So this was a natural transition when we decided to do this type of training, that they asked me to do it. I was willing, thought it was a great idea, and so hopefully my background and training then can transition to help put this program together.
And Kelly, you were partnering with Daryn on this, and I know you're working with him. How did you get involved in the active shooter program?
Similar to Daryn, just not as long or as experienced as Daryn, but I've been with the department for 13 years. I've been on SWAT team for 11. I do the field training for the new people that we hire, and then I also run the firearms program with another officer. And then Daryn and I and another officer do a lot of our situational training within the department. And it initiated with the city wanting to do a basic familiarization with active shooter response with the city employees. So Daryn and I came up with a program that we gave to the city employees, and then it started to branch out to other communities and businesses, and it kind of took off from there.
So that's the local view, which we are fortunate to have you. Now, Daryn, the FBI and Homeland Security probably have come up with a definition or the parameters of active shooters. Could you give us a little bit of background as to what we're talking about here?
They define it as an individual or individuals actively killing, in the act of killing. Generally, it's a populated area. Generally, it's a confined area. They're random, unexpected, and hard to predict. So that's the definition of an active shooter. We often use the term shooter, but it could be other things. It could be knives, explosives, fire, just an active threat.
Some type of harmful
Exactly.
tendency, and the person or persons try to disrupt a community. It could be caused by several different reasons. What are some of the reasons you found in your research?
Generally, these types of people are the the people that killed themselves in their mom's basement 30 years ago. And now this is becoming more popular, unfortunately, and more publicized.
Sometimes domestic violence.
Sometimes that's generally more of a specific target.
Or political problems.
Yeah.
Political issues. Why does the Medina Police Department feel that there's a need for this type of training? What inspired Chief Kinney, Mayor Hanwell, and others there at the department in the city to get you folks involved?
Well, it's becoming more of a national issue and a world issue. And our city recognized the need for training, and we're trying to help out with that.
So do you see your goal as providing the right responses? What are some of the responses you hope you're imparting to the people that work in buildings, like if there was a threat in their building, in their schools, and so forth?
Well, rarely are we ever present when something like this happens.
So the police are usually not
We get
around.
called after the fact and are responding. What we're trying to do is educate the public on how to respond when something like this happens. Give them a plan of action, a course of action, teach them survival skills to keep themselves and others alive until the police get there. So we're trying to empower them to be responsible for their own safety and give them a plan and then build on that.
I know there's larger hospitals in the area, like the Cleveland Clinic organization. Their Cleveland Clinic police have provided ALICE training, which is the acronym ALICE being alert, and you could follow up.
Yeah, that's a great national program that offers a great training. I would encourage businesses, individuals to seek out training, whether it's to contact their local police department, local sheriff's department, see what they offer,
Right.
and sign up for the training. In addition, if wherever they work, encourage their employee to provide training and maybe suggest it, and reach out to some of those agencies that do that training nationwide. There's a lot of online resources, and it can be something as small as what we do. A 2-hour class is what we're initially starting with, just to give them, get them start thinking and be responsible for their own safety, and they can build on that as much or as in-depth as they want, really.
And as Kelly, as you pointed out, it's expanding. It doesn't just apply to workplace or schools. What are some of the other areas that you found?
Could be anywhere. Populated areas, popular areas are usually the target. These type of suspects are usually looking for as many targets as possible in as small of a area as possible, because unfortunately their main goal is to be famous, for as sick as that can be, but they're trying to rack up a high body count is usually their goal.
And if you could, Daryn, could you explain, break down the types of things that you start to cover in your class and your training?
We start with the very basics. What is suspicious? Trying to identify suspicious behavior, and it depends and it differs. We've done some training with government agencies, government buildings, City Hall, giving them kind of an idea what to look for. What is suspicious to them might be different than someone that works in a restaurant or something. So try and keep it appropriate to what or where they work. Just get them thinking, what is suspicious? What do I do when I see somebody or somebody acting suspicious to call us, obviously. Trust your instincts. A lot of times people don't for some reason, so we encourage people to trust their survival instincts, to say something if they see something out of place. So we kind of start from there, and we are trying to build them a plan. Obviously, we have a 3-step plan that we use called Run, Hide, Fight. You'll hear it called different things throughout the country. Basically, they're all kind of the same, but that's kind of the plan that we follow. And so we try and build on that. Again, this is mostly just classroom, getting them thinking along the lines of, where do I work or where do I hang out? We mentioned that, it doesn't have to happen just where you work. It can be malls, theaters, restaurants. Just kind of a little bit of, situational awareness can go a long way to keeping you safe in your everyday life. And I would encourage people, not to interrupt, but just to encourage people to share it as a family, discuss it with your kids. Unfortunately, it has to be something that we talk about with our kids and start coming up with a plan as a family. If something happens, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to handle it. So
Bring it to the local,
Yes.
local needs, the local situation that goes on in your community. So police departments nationwide have had to change the way they've responded. Can you touch a little bit, either of you or both of you, on how things have changed, a little bit of how people should react, and nationwide what some of the problems have been?
Columbine was kind of the catalyst for
So it's
a lot of these
Colorado,
issues.
right?
Yep. And nobody really had dealt with that kind of situation before. It certainly wasn't a national issue that people knew about, and it's gotten worse and worse and more frequent as time has gone on. But initially, the thought was, to surround the building, wait for SWAT to show up, and then let SWAT handle it. But as that clock is ticking, there's more and more victims that are caused. So now the train of thought has changed to usually as soon as 2, maybe 3 officers arrive on scene, they're going in as a 2 or 3 man team to try to eliminate the threat as quickly as possible.
Now, situational awareness, Daryn, you talked a little bit about some of the clues. If you're in a mall, or if you're in a theater, you're in a lobby of a big building, and you see somebody coming in. Give us an example of something, a scenario.
well, first thing I would be thinking about are where are the exits, because if something bad happens, that's what I want to do, is run, or evacuate, or however you want to word it. That's your initial response. Hopefully, is to know where the exits are, have a plan of how to get there, have multiple exits. Just kind of be aware. We're not preaching hypervigilance. We just want people just to be aware, and to be aware of their family and those around them that they may have to help in a situation like that, and what is suspicious, and trust your instincts. And if you see something that's a little bit out of place or doesn't belong, or someone's acting a little strange, take a minute and take note of it. I'm not saying you have to start running or fleeing there, but just pay a little bit of an extra attention to that, and be thinking, maybe I'm going to have to evacuate or run out of here. Or the second thing would be to hide if something bad were going to happen, and ultimately, unfortunately, you may have to get in a situation where you have to fight or act or counter, or however you want to word it. There may be a time for that as well. But
All right, and we're going to, in a minute or two, going to talk about some of the do's and don'ts you think that are typical that people should or should not respond. We are on Forum 360, and we are a program with a global outlook, a local view. We're on PBS Western Reserve, the Fusion Channels 45, 49, Rubber City radio stations, WONE-FM, WAKR, AM and FM, and our host studio, Hudson Community TV, HCTV. Our guests today are law enforcement officers and people that are teaching about active shooting, Medina Police Department officers Daryn Winebrenner and Kelly Moran. About the do's and don'ts, some of the typical things that you think police officers, the FBI, Homeland Security realizes after several of these tragedies have occurred. What are some of the do's and don'ts? Kelly Moran?
Well, the biggest don't is freeze, and that's what we're trying to eliminate as best we can, because our survival instincts are fight or flight, but also freeze is a common response to high stress situations. So Daryn likes to remind me of President Roosevelt.
Teddy Roosevelt?
That's right.
Teddy Roosevelt.
He was famous for saying that in a moment of decision, the best thing you can do is the right thing. The next best thing you can do is the wrong thing, but the worst thing that you can do is nothing.
Right.
And those are generally, in these types of situations, the people that end up getting hurt or killed are the people that panic, freeze, and do nothing. And so we're trying to just get people's minds started to think about how they would respond to a situation like this, so that they know what they should be doing.
Now, Daryn, in some of the communities, we have people that are CCW trained by their local sheriff or their local police, or their private companies that are training CCW. So have you found that these people are beneficial to have in a situation like this until the police come, or what's your
personally, yes, I would feel, I would want
somebody
someone there
to be aware
that can
of it.
address the threat,
Respond.
either return fire. But there's a lot of responsibility for those people, and we try to cover some of that in the class. If you are in a situation like this, and we try to kind of break it down for them and preach that it is a lot of responsibility if you're going to carry. Just be prepared to use it, know when you can use it, be proficient in it, and don't develop a false sense of security by carrying it. And the rules of engagement, when the police arrive, how are you going to treat that if you are there trying to protect yourself or others or your family, and now the police are showing up to quickly identify yourself so that there's no friendly fire.
Now, is this training the active shooter training in response to the active shooter situation? Do you provide hands-on training here? What are the benefits of hands-on training?
At this point, it's just classroom. It's kind of in its infant stages. We're still figuring out what the needs of the community are and how we can best be utilized in the community. So as of right now, it's a 2-hour presentation in the classroom that we put on. But absolutely, hands-on training is very beneficial. We might get to that point. We do hands-on training with the department, and it's very beneficial.
We're trying to encourage people that, what is your policy at work? Do you have an emergency action plan in place? And if you do, familiarize yourself with that. In addition to that, implement some scenario-based training. We can assist with that locally in our community with doing scenario-based training. It's very effective. As police officers, we like to put our officers through that, and we would encourage people to not only the classroom setting, but then to get into some scenario-based training where they can apply the skills they have, develop a little bit of confidence, and see how it plays out. And I would encourage people to include their first responders in that training. If we have local businesses, and we've done this with some of our businesses, with our SWAT team and our police officers, if they're going to have in-service training as far as how to implement their immediate action plan, they'll involve the SWAT team, and then together they can see how we'll react. They'll know how to react when we arrive, and we kind of know the layout of the place and their policies and procedures, how they'll handle that. So it's beneficial to do that. I know it takes time, it takes money, but very, very beneficial.
And the responses, not just the police, but the fire departments, the life support teams,
Yes.
the paramedics, they all have to be ready for action.
And those trainings with businesses, including us and other first responders, is important because a lot of times their expectations of what is going to happen when first responders show up is not reality. If somebody's wounded and there's still a shooter down the hallway, those first responders are going to bypass wounded people and go to the threat, which, as somebody laying on the ground, injured, they might expect to be helped right away, and that's not necessarily the case. They will be helped eventually, but the first priority of first responders, the police, is to go, neutralize the threat so that there's no more casualty.
And the bigger the operation, the bigger the building, the bigger the community. I think of in Nevada, Las Vegas, a few years ago, they had a person that took a sniper type position up in a hotel type scenario, shooting down. It would take a much more time and effort to find that person.
For sure.
And then there was the case last year in Dayton, Ohio, Montgomery County, where the police officers were nearby, and they were able to bring it to a close.
As quickly as those officers were able to respond, there were still however many casualties. So it happens fast.
Right.
And that's why we're trying to empower people to be responsible. And kind of adding on to that, we're trying to also teach a little bit of first aid, critical combat care, as far as tourniquets, quick clot, and things like that to have stocked, to have in their first aid kits, and get people thinking along those lines to stop bleeding in case there's situations like this, because again, it's going to be the people that are there and involved, they're going to be the ones that can have an impact on saving lives quickly as far as stopping bleeding. So we try and implement that into this class a little bit, talk a little bit about first aid, combat care, improvised tourniquets, things like that, to get them thinking along the lines.
So in a city such as Medina, or a community, other communities here in Northeast Ohio that have police that are doing the same thing or training, Would it be beneficial then to have the employers of larger buildings or malls or commercial buildings contact the local police and say, this is something we'd like you to implement and help train?
Absolutely.
Bring us into preventative
I would encourage employers to
programs.
provide this type of training. If they don't already have an emergency action plan, to put one in place, to train on it, to reach out to the local police departments to see what kind of training they offer, to have combined training. And there's lots of agencies and companies online that they can seek out that will provide this type of training a little more in depth. They can come out to your place and do a risk assessment and take a tour of your place and kind of talk about how it applies specifically to them and what they can do better to change and make it more safe. So,
do you find that there are certain organizations that attract these active shooters? Is there a type of schools? Obviously, we've seen a lot. Kelly brought up one of the originals with Columbine, but are there other types of organizations that seem to attract?
Not
this type of
necessarily,
shooters?
which that's why it's so difficult to combat, because
It could be random.
It's very random. Basically, the only common denominator is populated areas, generally soft targets, meaning the least amount of expected resistance. So they're not generally happening at a pro-Second Amendment rally where everybody's armed. They're usually looking for as many possible victims with as little resistance as possible, which is part of the reason why, as silly as it sounds on the surface of the fight part of the run, hide, fight, the people that are doing these kinds of things are not looking for any type of resistance. So even a locked door in the hide part can buy people enough time just for the police to get there, because these things don't last very long. And then if a last resort to fight back, that is the opposite of what the person is generally expecting. And even though they might be more well-armed with guns and things, they're not expecting any type of resistance, and that really throws them off of their expectations of how the event's going to happen.
We've even seen these at military posts. They've had recently in the last year or so, we've had people in the military or people visiting military posts do the same thing. In Florida, they had that with the.
And we try and touch a little bit on maybe some of the signs to look for in somebody that may be prone to this. And generally, people don't just snap. There are signs. Their behavior is erratic. The poor work performance, increased use of drug and alcohol, like increased paranoia or talking about weapons. So there are some signs that you can kind of see, and we encourage people to report it to their supervisors, to involve the police, because rarely do they just snap and it just happens out of the blue. There are some signs that we should be looking for. Hopefully we can prevent these things from happening is part of what our message is also, but then give people the skills that if it's happening, it's not a lose situation, and that they have the skills to survive.
What's some of the feedback from people in your community, in the Medina community, about the training you're giving?
It's been overwhelmingly positive. This started off as a request to just do a short training for city employees, and now it seems like every couple of weeks we're being requested to go somewhere else to talk. And we're not teaching anything groundbreaking. This is mostly from Homeland Security, and any department can teach this.
Right.
And there's private companies that do this, and we're very much scratching the surface of the details that can be involved. I mean, this could be a week-long training or longer. There's a lot to cover. So we're trying to just give people a background and an understanding and just an awareness of what to look for.
And we've heard people say sometimes the media brings a lot of this out, and you have copycats. You have people that see something in one community and they want to do the same thing, to do the same negative impact on another community, thinking, wow, it worked, this happened here. But if you have the alert citizenry, the alert employees, the people that you're trying to train for this response to the active shooters, I can see that those kind of things could be lessened. And that's what we're looking for. We've got about a minute or so for The last minute or two, if you could each give us 30 seconds of what you hope to do in the future, how to improve this training.
Well, we're excited about this training and looking forward to do more of it. We just want to empower people to be responsible for their own safety in their everyday lives, whether it's where they work or where they live, in their home, when they're out and about. But then give them a little bit of a plan. Like, what if something happens? Start playing it through in your mind and have a little bit of a plan how you're going to respond to that, and then build on that if you decide to.
Kelly, Moran?
Yeah, again, this isn't the end all as far as training. We're just trying to get people aware of the need for it, and hopefully they can seek out additional training. We're trying to minimize victims and let people know that they can do something to help survive.
There we go, an active shooter response plan. Training is available. The City of Medina has provided officers from the Medina Police Department. Other community police agencies in Northeast Ohio and Western Pennsylvania can do the same. I want to thank you for being here on Forum 360, and we hope to have our audience respond in a way that should be positive. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Forum 360 is brought to you by John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, the Akron Community Foundation, Hudson Community Television, the Rubber City Radio Group, Shaw Jewish Community Center of Akron, Blue Green, Electric Impulse Communications, and Forum 360 supporters.